friends, Pastor Karen here with a Thoughtful Thursday. Wow, the Thursdays seem to be coming faster and faster for me. I hope that you had a really great week and that you found the presence of God somewhere and that you were blessed. We're continuing our little chat weekly about the 7 last words of Jesus from the cross. And we're on week 5 already. Wow, Lent has gone by quickly. And so today we're talking about some words that we hear only in John's Gospel in chapter 19, verses 28 and 29, where Jesus says, I'm thirsty. 2 words, I'm thirsty. And at first, if we don't give it, if we just think about it on the surface, we think, of course he's thirsty. He's just been physically tortured. He's hanging on a cross. It's probably really hot. He probably is thirsty. But as I kind of sat with these words this week and did a little bit of reading and studying about what other scholars think of these words, I was quickly reminded that thirst is a human condition. And I was so quickly reminded that Jesus, in this very moment, is displaying his humanness. We know that Jesus came to this earth incarnate, fully God, fully human. But in this moment, this is when we realize the humanness of Jesus, that he is indeed thirsty, likely a physical impairment of needing something to drink. But why do we only see these words, I'm thirsty, in the book of John? The Gospel of John, which is so different than the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke in so many ways. John doesn't say much that only has a superficial meaning. He usually is trying to point us to something more significant about Jesus. And when Jesus speaks and Jesus uses metaphors and Jesus uses parables, there's likely some underlying story that John really wants us to scratch the surface and go a little bit deeper. It's so interesting that in the book of John, in chapter 4, we read that amazing story about the woman at the well, right? So she's there in the middle of the day when no one else would come to the well because she's embarrassed by her social status. She knows that people will poke fun at her, that they will belittle her. But Jesus is coming along and he says to the woman, give me a drink. And she has all these reasons why she can't give him a drink. So Jesus is really saying to this woman, I'm thirsty. Can you give me a drink? And so eventually Jesus says, if you knew who was asking, you would ask me for a drink because I can give you living water. So John didn't want us to tell us the story about the fact that the woman could drop her bucket down into the well and pull up the water and scoop it into a cup and give it to Jesus, who was likely tired from his journey in the heat. But this water, this thirst, we know from John chapter 4 that Jesus is talking about this thirst for everlasting life, this thirst for forgiveness, this thirst for sanctification, this thirst for being in right relationship with God. That's the thirst that Jesus is speaking of. So I wonder, as Jesus was hanging there on the cross, if when he said, I'm thirsty, it was a physical impairment for sure. But I'm also wondering if in that moment, when he felt separated from God, we talked about that last week, right? Where he felt what that thirst for that living water must be like. I found it interesting, though, too, as I did a little bit of reading this week, that John says that Jesus says, I'm thirsty in order to fulfill this scripture, right? So I wondered, what scripture is that? And it's actually from Psalm 69. It says, for my thirst, they give me vinegar to drink. And so as we read further on in John chapter 19, that's what happens, right? They put the vinegar or the sour wine on the hyssop branch and they offer it to Jesus. So often Jesus reminds us that this was all planned, that this was not happenstance, that this was happening, that This was God's plan all along for Jesus to come to earth to teach and preach and gain followers and encourage them to find others, and then to sacrifice himself for us. And so this is just a reminder that Jesus really did die on the cross because this is what had been prophesied long ago in Isaiah. So maybe this was just an opportunity in just those few words for Jesus, the people around Jesus, and for us today to be reminded that that this wasn't just Jesus being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was the plan. So his thirst in his human condition, his reminder to us that being thirsty is meaning that we are searching for that everlasting life, and that if we believe in Jesus, that if we follow Jesus and we do and act and be like Jesus as a servant, then we too will have that living water, because Jesus already died on the cross, my friends. He already did that for us, so that now we can drink from that living well of water. And how that quenches our thirst, doesn't it? The Gospel of John is really my very favorite gospel, at least in this season of my life. So I would encourage you to kind of dig in a little bit this week. Go back and forth in the Gospel of John, or even just Google water and the Gospel of John. If you just Google it, you'll find some really awesome articles that talk about all the places in the Gospel of John where Jesus references water or thirst. And it really does illuminate this part of John where Jesus is hanging on the cross in John 19. And he says, I'm thirsty. The one last thing that it reminds me of, though, so much, and I love to have a good takeaway at the end of this little chat that we have together, is if Jesus is thirsty, where do we hear that in other Gospels? Right, in the Gospel of Matthew, in the 25th chapter, Jesus says, if the people ask Jesus, well, when did we see you thirsty and not give you something to drink? Or Jesus says, when you give others something to drink, you're giving that drink to me. And so maybe that's just another opportunity for folks to remember that Jesus is thirsty on the cross. And how do we quench the thirst of Jesus? We do that by quenching the thirst of our neighbors. We do that by offering this living water, this opportunity to have this everlasting sanctified life with God. And maybe too, we also just need to offer water. So sometimes this is a donation to your food bank, or some water that you might give to some folks who are homeless in your community. Maybe this is offering a bottle of water or drink of water to someone who's doing some work on your house in the outside. So this week I want you really to think about water, how often you drink it. What does that mean to thirst like Jesus did? And how can we quench our thirst with our personal devotion to God? And how can we quench other people's thirst physically, or by introducing them to this amazing salvation of God? And so I hope that you have a great week. I hope that you're inspired and encouraged and challenged. And I hope that you find the strength and the patience and the boldness to step forward and offer someone this drink of living water. Have a great week, my friends.